Baker Botts, LLP, provides podcasts for educational purposes only. They are not legal advice and are not intended to establish an attorney client relationship. This communication may constitute attorney advertising.
Welcome to AI Council Code. The AI Council Code is here to keep you up to date on all AI legal issues arising in the modern business frontier. I'm your host, Maggie Welsh, and today we have a very interesting topic to talk about: deepfakes and some of the legal causes of actions like right of publicity surrounding the deepfake discussion. So Julie Albert is with us today, a partner in our New York office. Hi, Julie.
Hey, Maggie, great to be here.
Why don't you introduce yourself for our listeners?
Hey, everyone. My name is Julie. I'm a partner in Baker Botts Brand Advertising and Copyright Group. And as you can expect, that group has been seeing a lot of interest and getting a lot of questions about how deepfakes are being used, what laws apply, and what advice we can offer as clients are navigating these challenging issues.
Great. Thank you, Julie, and thanks for joining us today. For our listeners who don't know, a deepfake is generally created by artificial intelligence, and it can include images, video, and audio that portray something that does not exist in reality or portrays events that have never occurred. So you could have a voice generation that sounds like someone else's voice but wasn't actually said by that person, or a video image of something that didn't actually happen. And you can see with these deep fakes, there is a concern that arises for fraud, scams, misinformation, non-consensual imagery, and the list goes on and on. So Julie, I want to talk about the current scope of the law that exists to help protect victims of deep fakes and what that looks like today.
Maggie, that's a good place to start because we do have a patchwork of laws that will apply to deepfakes and apply to some of these AI-generated creations. Of course, we do have right to privacy and publicity laws, but famously in the United States, those are in the states. So each state has the ability to regulate or not regulate an individual's right to privacy or publicity. And the fact that we're even using both of those words instead of just saying right to privacy shows how inconsistent some of these laws can be across states. In states where entertainment is a large part of the economy, California, for example, it shouldn't surprise you that they have a far more developed set of case law and laws and guidance around rights to privacy and publicity. But one challenge we're seeing with deepfakes is they're not just impacting celebrities. They're not just impacting people who have historically been able to monetize their likeness. Now we're talking about right to privacy. We're talking about regular people like you or me. I mean, you're a famous podcast host now, so maybe not you. But people like you and I who are not typically monetizing our likenesses. So we've got our patchwork of right to privacy and publicity laws. We've got trademark law, which can help a little bit, but again, that's about source indicating function. So if your image, if your likeness, if your voice serves a source indicating function, there could be some protection in the trademark space. We've seen celebrities try this as well. And then we've got a copyright regime as well, which talks about a creative work fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So if you have an image of yourself or a video of yourself that was used or manipulated, that could be another way into challenging a deepfake.
Thanks, Julie, for that overview. And let's dive deep into the right of publicity that you mentioned that does apply to celebrities. So what does that look like at the state level?
So let's focus on California and New York, just because they're two jurisdictions that have more developed rights and laws around this area. So California has a statute that prohibits the non-consensual use of a person's likeness for advertising purposes. And that doesn't end when you die. It extends 70 years past a person's death. So you can sometimes see estates and descendants who've inherited that right to publicity still able to leverage those rights after the person's death. In California, there's also a much broader common law right that protects against appropriating a person's identity to another's advantage. As you can imagine, that's fairly broad, and there's a lot that can fall into that. But most states typically have that first requirement, that it must be used for a commercial purpose or for an advertising purpose, and New York is one of those. So under New York law, there's a statutory right of publicity that protects against a non-consensual use of a person's likeness, again, for advertising purposes. And another difference majorly between New York and California is under New York law, that right lasts as long as you do. It only extends for the duration of a person's lifetime. So even within these two states that protect a person's likeness expressly, there are some pretty significant differences between the two.
And so you mentioned that New York requires a commercial use element, but there's been recent reports of robocalls, for example, deepfakes of President Biden's voice. So how have states responded to situations like this that don't necessarily involve a commercial use?
One really hot topic these days, and one concern that a lot of folks have with deepfake technology, is its ability to influence public opinion and particularly elections. So a few months ago, I think it was in New Hampshire, there were robocalls that were going around simulating President Biden to encourage or change voter practices. That's a pretty scary use of generative AI. And in reaction, states have recognized that and have started enacting laws that are criminalizing the use of deepfakes to influence elections. Minnesota, Texas have gone there, and there are lots of other jurisdictions exploring how to do that in a way that is in line with all of the other obligations and requirements that we have under election law.
And it's hard to talk about deepfakes without talking about some of the famous celebrities recently who have been subject to deepfakes, like Taylor Swift and Scarlett Johansson. So would these celebrities be protected under the right of publicity laws?
Typically, these are the kinds of folks that would probably have the most leverage in some of these areas. However, we still have the commercial use requirement in some states. We have to look at all of the requirements. And unfortunately, the wheels of justice turn very slowly. And the harm that's felt in these images, which are so ephemeral, they come in and out, they appear, they proliferate, they're everywhere. Sometimes courts are not fast enough and can't be fast enough to deliver the relief that we need. The sands are also shifting quickly and faster than not only laws can keep up, but sometimes even enforcement. So there's lots of platforms out there that have takedown mechanisms and the ability to get relatively quick relief. But we've all felt the whack-a-mole of the internet. We've seen how fast things move along. So challenges with enforcing this are not only the patchwork of privacy and publicity laws, but uncertainty around what even are the rights that you have that you're enforcing in the first place. It's a challenging new world on both sides.
You mentioned that there's no federal legislation right now for the right of publicity, but what would a federal version of that look like? What have some of the proposals look like?
We're seeing that happen in real time, Maggie. In January, the House introduced what's called the No AI Fraud Act. That's not enacted yet, and it would create a private right of action against anyone who, in a manner affecting interstate or foreign commerce, publishes or distributes a deepfake without the subject's consent. That's broad. That's broader than many of the state laws out there. It doesn't require the defendant to receive some kind of advantage from the publication or distribution of those deepfakes. And it also provides very strong remedies. $5,000 per unauthorized publication or distribution, or actual damages of profits. It also seeks to diminish the market for deepfakes. That's a problem too, is where there's a market, there's a way. So what this bill does is provides a cause of action against providers of deepfake services. Plaintiffs would be able to recover $50,000 for each instance the service was provided to the public, or actual damages plus profits. There is a First Amendment defense here. It's similar to copyright fair use, but that's another podcast topic for another day, because copyright fair use is, especially in the generative AI space, is very much in flux. How we're interpreting it, what it means, what it allows, and what it doesn't. So we can take that exception as something in there, but it doesn't really provide much certainty. There was another draft bill last year called the No Fakes Act. That includes some pretty similar language to the No AI Fraud bill, but there are specific carve-outs that would allow deepfakes, including for news reports, sports broadcasts, documentaries, scholarship, and satire. Again, feels a little bit like fair use. A lot of those categories of things track somewhat the Copyright Act. But the interesting thing about the No Fakes Act and all of this is we want to make sure, like with any technology, it's a careful balance, that we are guarding against the improper use of that technology, but also allowing it to grow and flourish. Because if we held copyright law, if we held legislation where it was when those laws were originally enacted, it would be meaningless.
Thanks, Julie. And I think one way that legislators are thinking about deepfakes too is transparency and making sure that if you are using deepfake technology to create images that aren't actually happening or create someone else's voice, that you're being transparent about that. So you're telling consumers that this is using AI generated technology.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that it would be much easier in a perfect world to know that every image you see on the internet from immediate first view is made by AI or not. But we don't necessarily live in a perfect world, and we're seeing instances where you're using tools and AI tools to enhance something. So while it seems like a clear line of this is a deep fake, this is AI, this is not, at some point we'll see technology blur those lines. So deciding when, whether, and how to apply those watermarks or what other indicia of AI involvement or AI pure generation, that will evolve over time.
Interesting. Thank you, Julie, for sharing your insights today. Any final tips or tidbits for our listeners on this topic?
I think just let's watch what happens. We are in a time of incredibly fast development of this technology. We're going to see where it settles. We're going to see some of the early use cases that might seem a little scary. We're going to start seeing some use cases that seem like a great idea. We're going to see legislation pass and cases get settled and filed and developed. And at this stage, it's hard to say that there's a clear answer because there isn't. We know what's a problem. And typically when there's something that seems like a problem, we find solutions. We find a way to make sure that the people's interests here, their very likenesses, who they are, what they sound like, are protected, and make sure that we're able, for the people who make a living based on their images and likenesses and voices, are able to protect those interests as well. So wait and see, keep an eye on the developments, and let's talk again in a couple months, see where we're at.
Excellent. I'll hold you to that. Thank you, Julie. And thank you to Coleman Strine, who helped with the research and preparing this podcast. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the AI Council Code. We're so glad that you joined us today, and stay tuned for additional podcasts and more insight on AI legal issues from Baker Botts.
Thank you for listening to this Baker Botts podcast. Baker Botts has the experience, knowledge, and people to address our clients' most significant legal issues. For more information on Baker Botts practices, please visit us at bakerbotts.com. This presentation is provided by Baker Botts LLP for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship. Under the rules of certain jurisdictions, this communication may constitute attorney advertising.